Abel Mableson, an important figure in history. Why? He was the first to say the phrase that would change the world forever. Does the world remember a time when these words didn't dominate all political rhetoric on both sides of the divide? The fierce debate on climate change and environmental issues, and even a baby deer's first steps into the great unknown? If anyone does remember, they'll remember why it was called the before times. Yet no one knows the man who birthed these words, who breathed life into a phrase, who animated the spirit of a dying world. Abel Mableson, the first man to say, "Take it sleazy, catch you on the flip-flop." Before Abel Mableson had changed the world, he was generally considered to be a pretty nondescript-mannered, entirely forgettable type. He was the type of person with whom you'd be talking, and based on how dull and interesting it was, it'd feel like he'd fade out of existence and become one with the Monotoforce, which is just the force from Star Wars and the word monotonous made into a clumsy portmanteau. But it's real, so I can hardly be blamed for lazy writing, can I? When he was a child, he would be left out of games, not because he wasn't popular, but was so forgettable that while standing in a group waiting to be selected, he couldn't be seen with the naked eye. As a university student, he avoided the ignominy of being chastised for not doing the assigned readings by simply never being called upon. Even when he would approach his lecturer and confess his apathy, the lecturer would assume a light breeze was creeping through the window and go and close it instead. He was the human equivalent of Wally from Where's Wally, but instead of having a distinct and jaunty red and white striped outfit, he was dressed like the absence of colour, or the illustrator simply forgot to include him entirely. To illustrate this phenomena in greater detail, let's examine an evening Abel Mableson spent at a nice restaurant with friends. The restaurant itself was considered lively, with an atmosphere conducive to interesting and remarkable events on a regular basis. It received such Yelp reviews as, "Great burgers and wow!" The staff were helpful, the tables were clean and food delicious. Also, someone took umbrage with the colour of their eggs and tried to weaponize their sausages to take revenge on the chef in a display of incredible engineering and vicious perceived betrayal. 4.5 stars! And the food, delicious. Atmosphere, serene. I'd be back every day if I had the time, lol. Also, someone ate too many pancakes and literally exploded in the dessert station. They were picking pieces of him out of the soft serve machine for a while until they decided it was best to put a sign on it saying, "Try our new ice cream, chunk surprise." 5 stars. All in all, you'd assume this was it. An evening prime for Abel Mableson to be tangentially related to an exciting event, and perhaps be remembered by Proxy. It started out like any other night. Abel Mableson's friends ordered interesting dishes, like antagonized creme brulee, from interesting wait staff named things like Snoozin' Sleepyfield and Territorial Dispute. Abel Mableson ordered the white bread sandwich, hold the ingredients, with water in a plain paper cup. It was a special occasion after all. Soon they all began to eat their entrees, and Abel Mableson started to fade from existence as more interesting things began to overwhelm his presence. The sound of chewing. Inane conversation about how tender the whatever is. Someone asking if they put Himalayan or sea salt on the who cares. As his edges became imperceptible to the human eye, 4 young men and women jumped onto the table and started screaming something. "Ooh, a robbery," one of the table guests mused. The young man pulled out what looked like a gun and started waving it around, while the young woman hastily unzipped her jacket and revealed a bulky vest strapped to her chest and a small remote control in her hand. All the other patrons ducked under the table, fearing the worst. The young man aimed his gun right at Abel Mableson and fired. A large bang caused Abel Mableson to shut his eyes, finding peace in a life well lived. I guess some people have incredibly low standards. Abel Mableson opened his eyes slowly and calmly, prepared to see a knee-high chain-link fence, the equivalent of the pearly gates for boring people, and all he saw was a man dancing furiously. The young woman hit her remote with force, and the restaurant gasped in anticipation of a fiery death. Then, disco lights lowered from the ceiling and an upbeat Europop started playing on loudspeakers. By this time, I'm sure you've guessed it. Abel Mableson was there at the beginning of the Venga Boys' illustrious career, arguably the most famous debut performance of all time. Yet Abel Mableson's friends didn't even say goodnight to him afterwards, forgetting he was even there. In fact, in the subsequent retelling of the story, Abel Mableson was replaced with a single plain post-it note stuck loosely to the edge of the table. All of this, suffice to say, made the eventual utterance of the most important phrase in history so very surprising indeed. This moment in history took place on a cold winter's evening, but left a breath of spring in its wake. Abel Mableson, so tired of the constant ignorance of his being, took matters into his own hands. As he sat at his desk, doing work so mundane it put the mean into menial, his colleagues started to leave for their homes. As usual, Abel Mableson was mistaken for a potted plant, and his desk mate sprayed him with a light mist to keep his leaves from wilting. As she opened the office door and reached for the light switch, Abel Mableson was overcome with a bolt of inspiration. A column of insight broke forth from the heavens. Abel Mableson opened his mouth, and pure, unadulterated lyrical magic erupted from his unassuming vocal cords. "Take it sleazy, catch you on the flip-flop." As if a colourless world was suddenly awash with vivid colours from the entire spectrum, his colleague appeared to acknowledge his existence. "Hey, you must be the new guy," she said. "You must be cool as shit." "I will take it sleazy. Thanks, friend." From that moment onwards, life was never to be the same.